On a frozen Montana highway, a former Navy SEAL slammed the brakes so fiercely his dog lunged forward because amid the blizzard, he witnessed something no soul should ever face, a widow clutching a baby close to her chest. Behind her, children stumbled along, wrapped in frail layers that offered no shield from the raging storm. They shivered helplessly in the cutting wind, their footprints already swallowed by the relentless snow. Yet when the cold clawed at their flesh, she did not shed a tear. She never screamed. She just pressed onward as if survival was no longer an option, but a harsh sentence she bore in silence. Then, stepping out into the howling storm wind ripping at his coat, the SEAL spoke words that would alter every life standing there. "Come with me. No one endures alone. But first, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story stirs your soul, subscribe for more tales of bravery, sacrifice, and the bonds that refuse to break. Your support means everything." The winter night bore down heavily upon the Montana highway, wind carving ghostly white scars across the darkness, as if the earth itself was trembling beneath the fury. Inside the worn pickup, Ethan Hale, 35, a former Navy SEAL forged from quiet storms, gripped the steering wheel tighter. His hands, rough and marked by countless battles breaching doors, dragging wounded comrades to safety, flexed unconsciously when the truck jerked on a slick patch of black ice. The dashboard light highlighted his sharp features, high cheekbones, a squared jaw shadowed by days of stubble, and eyes as cold and unyielding as steel eyes that had witnessed more than words could tell. Beside him sat Ranger, his 4-year-old sable German shepherd, broad-shouldered ears always perked for danger, his fur bristling like frost beneath the dim glow. Trained to sense fear, grief, and the faintest tremors of human panic, and tonight his low growl resonated through the cab. Ethan wasn't rushing anywhere urgent, not like in his past. He was returning to the family ranch left by his parents, a place that had burned down 2 winters ago while he was deployed. He thought the journey would be quiet, empty, maybe even dull. But instead, the storm intensified. Sharp needles of snow lashed the windshield, shrinking the world to a tunnel of white. Suddenly, Ranger growled fiercely, not at the wind, but at something alive. Ethan instinctively eased his foot off the gas. His headlights revealed a shadow hunched low by the roadside. At first it seemed a fallen fence post, half buried in snow. Then it shifted, and Ethan's breath hitched. A woman emerged, a fragile figure draped in a faded wool shawl, woven with Lakota patterns, her long black hair plastered to her cheeks by melting frost. Her skin, a warm copper beneath the chill, had faded to a ghostly pallor. She clutched a swaddled infant tight against her chest, holding the child as though the storm threatened to steal it away. Behind her, 4 small children stumbled, trembling, their thin clothes woefully unfit for the bitter night. Ranger barked sharply. Ethan slammed on the brakes, the truck fishtailing before settling. "Damn," he breathed under his breath, his heart pounding like it had never done since combat. Not from fear, but raw instinct. He shifted into park and stepped out into the slicing wind. The woman froze, even drained beyond measure. She stood with a fierce protectiveness, her shoulders set forward, ready to shield. Her feet pressed firmly against the slipping snow beneath them. Her dark, wide eyes reflected a storm of terror and defiance. She carried the aura of someone accustomed to facing danger alone. "Stay back," she whispered, tightening her hold on the baby. Ethan raised both gloved hands, slowly, palms open, a gesture of peace. He took in every detail, the trembling in her arms from cold and exhaustion, the bluish hue tinting the children's lips, and the eldest child nestling herself between her mother and Ethan like a fragile, quivering shield. His gaze caught the silver necklace resting at the woman's throat, a traditional Lakota emblem imprinted with a running horse. He saw how fiercely she guarded her little ones from the world. Years as a Navy SEAL had honed his instinct to read people in a heartbeat. She wasn't hostile, she was desperate. Pushing through the edge of collapse but refusing to surrender, Ranger leapt down from the passenger seat, landing quietly beside Ethan, alert yet non-threatening. Snow stuck to his whiskers, transforming him into a silent sentinel. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, the calm he once reserved for civilians in shock zones. "Come with me," he said. "No one makes it alone." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the screaming wind across the highway and the steady pulse of his own heartbeat. The woman blinked, snowflakes clinging to her lashes. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She simply looked at her children, at their trembling knees and reddened fingers, and something in her resolve cracked just enough for a flicker of hope to break free. She gave a faint nod. Ethan moved swiftly, but gently, lifting each child into the warm truck cab. Ranger stepped back, making space, positioning himself between the children and the door like a vigilant protector. The baby whimpered as warmth touched his face, then grew calm. The woman climbed in last, pausing only to glance back down the empty road, as if the storm itself might chase her still. Ethan closed the door behind her, the weight of this choice grounding him in a steady, familiar way. He slid into the driver's seat, fired up the heater, and steered the truck off the highway toward the cabin he had planned to face alone. But tonight it would hold more than silence. It would cradle the dawn of something none of them yet grasped. The cabin wrapped itself in a fragile warmth, unfolding slowly, like a fire learning to breathe again. Outside snow thrummed against the window panes in restless bursts, while inside the air held the fragile stillness of people unaccustomed to feeling safe. The children curled beneath thick blankets borrowed from an old cedar chest, their cheeks now free from the alarming tint of blue they'd worn by the roadside. Even Ranger Ethan's 4-year-old sable German shepherd stretched near the hearth with unwavering vigilance, amber eyes tracking every subtle motion in the room. The woman settled closest to the fire, her back straight, despite utter exhaustion. Her long black hair clung damp to her shoulders, melted snow stiffening the woven Lakota shawl draped around her. Deep reds and charcoal grays etched into its pattern. Beneath the shawl, her slender frame held the kind of strength carved not by choice, but by sheer survival. When she finally spoke her name, Sarah Wayaka, her voice carried the delicate weight of someone measured and mindful with her words. As if each word had to be measured carefully before escaping her lips, her story unfolded with heavy hesitation, not because she sought to conceal it, but because those memories sliced deep. Her father had disappeared in these rugged Montana mountains 15 years ago, leaving only unanswered prayers behind and a family too steadfast to mourn a man without a grave. His absence left a gaping wound in Sarah's world. Her mother, desperate to secure her daughter's future, arranged for her to marry into another Lakota family, one rooted in traditions as ancient as the earth itself, but carrying demands Sarah could never hope to meet. Her husband, Tuan, was once a man of broad shoulders and quiet dignity, but whiskey stole his pride and twisted it into obsession. He insisted on a son. Each daughter's birth deepened his bitterness, and his hands, once steady from crafting leather and carving bows, turned into tools of fury. At first there were apologies, tearful promises, and solemn mournings. Then the apologies grew scarce, the bruises darker. Sarah's voice remained calm, steady as she spoke, and Ethan understood that was part of the deeper ache in her story. When the children finally slipped into sleep, one clutching Rears's side as if the dog itself was a living, warm blanket, Ethan moved to sit opposite her. The firelight cast shadows across his harsh features, highlighting a jagged jawline and a faint scar near his brow, a stubble casting dust over his cheeks. Yet his eyes softened, shifting from steel to something worn, something vulnerable. He spoke quietly, like a soldier returning from the battlefield into the fragile calm of civilian life. Burdened with the weight of sand and gunpowder still lodged in his lungs. "My parents' ranch burned down 2 winters ago," he said. "I was deployed." He left it there, but the way his gaze dropped betrayed the heavy regret pressing down on him. The scent of scorched pine filled the quiet space between them. He went on sharing fragments of his last mission, not the secret parts, just the human stories. Operation Silent Dusk. 3 hostages rescued. 5 comrades lost. He didn't speak of the faces that haunted his nights, or the bitter taste of failure that lingered long after coming home. But the tension in his hands, the obsessive thumb rubbing over a scar on his wrist, told the true tale. Sarah watched him with the careful gaze of someone who knows danger, intimately drawn to the warmth, but ever cautious of the burn. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer pity. She simply listened, a rare gift more precious than comfort. Ranger lifted his head, sensing the heaviness in Ethan's breath. The dog nudged his elbow once, pulling him back from the edge. Ethan's lips twitched in something close to gratitude. The fire crackled as snow scraped against the window panes. 2 souls never meant to cross began quietly weaving their lives together. At last, Sarah whispered, "You carry ghosts." "So do you," Ethan replied. The fragile truth hung between them, binding broken paths beneath one roof. Not by fate, but by necessity. Sarah drew the blanket tighter around her baby, whose tiny fingers curled against her heart. She glanced toward the sleeping girls lined along the wall and exhaled a breath trembling with exhaustion, not fear. "For the first time in years," she murmured, "they're sleeping without waking to every sound." Ethan nodded, a tightness in his jaw, betraying his own emotion. "You're safe here," he assured her, a vow uttered by a man who never delivered promises lightly. Outside, the storm howled fiercely, shaking the cabin door with relentless force. Yet within those walls, something tender began to take shape. Not trust, not yet, but a quiet understanding, unspoken. Sometimes those shattered souls hold on better when they stop fighting to survive in solitude. The fire dwindled to glowing embers as Ranger gently rested his head on his paws. Sarah sank back against the wall, heavy-eyed, exhaling slow, steady breaths. Ethan remained watchful over them, the woman, the children, even the storm itself. With the silent resolve of a man who had lost too much and refused to lose any more. And somewhere within that worn, weather-beaten cabin, 2 broken lives began to find the faintest pulse of healing. The storm's fury softened the next afternoon, leaving behind a bruised sky and a thin glaze of ice that coated every surface the wind had swept across. The cabin, though battle-scarred and patched in spots, stood unwavering against the hush of winter. Ethan spent those early hours outside, fixing the horseshit, a low building with warped planks and rusted hinges. His gloves, numb from the cold, gripped the hammer with automatic steadiness. The steady pace of repair grounded him, allowing his mind to find rest where sleep no longer dared tread. Nearby, Ranger circled the shed with slow, measured steps. The dog's sable fur shimmered faintly in the dim light, and occasionally his gaze drifted toward the cabin, sensing the storms within human hearts, just as keenly as the storms of weather. Inside, Sarah moved softly through the tight spaces, tidying the sparse belongings. Her long black hair was loosely braided, a dark rope swinging gently as she bent to collect scattered firewood or shake dust from old linens. Her daughters assisted quietly, their hands tentative, as they folded blankets and stacked tin cups, careful with each motion, as if fearing the cabin might break apart if they were too loud. When Sarah knelt beside the old cedar bed frame searching for extra quilts, her fingers brushed against something solid, a small wooden chest square, and worn smooth from years of touch. She drew it into the light. The children fell silent. Sarah lifted the lid, releasing a single shattered breath. Inside lay a woven blanket, deep indigo embroidered with jagged streaks of white and silver, mirroring the broken lightning pattern. No 2 families wove the design the same, and this one bore the unmistakable mark of her own bloodline. The edges were frayed, the wool softened by time, yet she could see her father's hands in every knot and line. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. The scent of wood smoke and sage from long ago seemed to rise from its folds. Flashes came to her, her father lifting her on his shoulders, wrapping this very blanket around her, through bitter winters humming old songs that curled like incense into the night air. A storm churned just behind her eyes. When Ethan stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat, he caught the change in her stance before he spotted the blanket. Sarah's voice was a fragile whisper, brittle from deep within. "Where did you get this?" Ethan froze, breath catching in his throat. He didn't have to see the blanket to know which one it was. He had kept it hidden not out of disrespect, but because he couldn't bear to face it. Slowly, he peeled off his gloves as if baring his hands made the truth harder to hide. 15 years ago, he knew precisely which one it was. He'd kept it hidden not out of disrespect, but because he wasn't ready to confront it. He slipped off his gloves slowly, as if revealing his hands would make the truth even harder to face. 15 years ago, he began voice steady, yet hollow. My truck skidded off the mountain trail. The snowstorm hit without warning. I found myself dangling halfway over a ravine, unable to move my legs. Sarah never flinched. Then a man appeared. Ethan's voice picked up. Out of nowhere came Lakota, broad-shouldered, long, jet-black hair. Eyes kind despite the cold. His jaw was clenched tight. He wrapped that blanket around me, struggling to pull me to safety. The ranger stepped closer, sensing a change in the air. Ethan swallowed hard. He got me out. But then the earth beneath him crumbled away. Silence flooded the room, heavy and unyielding. Sarah pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook not from sobs, but from the weight of painful recognition. Time placed the pattern on the blanket, there was no doubt. It was her father. She stood abruptly, gathering her baby and signaling her daughters. Their wide eyes flickered between her and Ethan, sensing a moment that would never be forgotten. Something fractured in the air. Ethan's chest tightened with mounting dread as she moved toward the door. Snow gusted inside as she opened it. "Sarah!" He stepped out after her, the cold slicing sharply at his face. She kept walking through the fresh, untouched snow, boots sinking deep with every step. Ethan trailed behind, his breath swirling into white mist in the frigid air. "Sarah!" he called again, voice raw with emotion. "Please!" She only turned when her children halted behind her, too weary to go further. The baby whimpered against her shoulder, his tiny fingers grasping her braid. Ethan's voice cracked. "Your father died saving me." A cold wind rose, tugging at her shawl. "I never went to your family," he confessed. "Didn't tell a soul. I told myself it wasn't my place. But the truth is," he dropped his gaze, shame etching deeper lines across his face. "I was scared. Scared of what I'd taken from you. Scared of the look you might give me now." Sarah's eyes shimmered with a grief so profound it seemed to age the very storm around them. "I lived," he whispered, "and he didn't. Every day since I've carried that burden." The children drew closer to their mother, their breaths forming a fragile, misty veil between them. Sarah blinked hard, fighting tears. Her voice wavered. "Do you know what it means?" she asked softly. To wait 15 long years for someone who never returned. Ethan raised his head. The answer was written in the way he stood, shoulders heavy, unguarded. "Yes," he said, "more than you can imagine." The wind softened, as if listening. Sarah looked at her shivering, exhausted children, then back at the cabin's faint glow through the snow. Her sorrow didn't fade, but something practical, maternal, and deeply rooted began to rise above it. She exhaled shakily. "I'm not forgiving you," she declared. "Not tonight." Ethan nodded, fully embracing the pain she dealt. "But the children," she whispered, "need warmth, shelter, and rest." She turned toward the cabin. "We go back." With that, she stepped past him, her daughters trailing behind like a delicate procession, leaving Ethan alone in the snow, his guilt raw beneath Montana's gray sky. The following days fell into a steady rhythm of quiet actions and careful breaths. Snow rested in soft piles, transforming the ranch into a world hushed and muted. Yet inside the small cabin, life began to stir again, slow and uncertain, as if warmth itself had to be relearned. Life began to stir again, fragile and hesitant, like the warmth itself needed to be rediscovered. Ethan rose with the dawn, his breath steaming in the cold as he swung the axe hacking wood behind the shed with steadfast resolve. His broad shoulders and methodical movements, honed by years of military grit, made the labor seem effortless, though every strike echoed with the weight of memories he carried. Dark strands of hair fell over his face whenever he bent to pile the logs, those defiant locks softening the ironclad image of the man beneath. Ranger stayed faithfully at his side, the loyal 4-year-old dog's eyes unwavering as they shadowed Ethan's every move. Inside the cabin, Sarah found her own steady pace. Her tall, graceful frame moved with quiet assurance as she guided her daughters in folding blankets, preparing modest meals and gently humming the ancient Lakota lullabies as night cloaked their home. Her skin glowing warm copper under the flickering firelight seemed to brighten just a little more with each passing day. Oftentimes she gathered a small bundle of dried sage, igniting it by the threshold. The smoke wove soft spirals, drifting upward as she murmured, whispered thanks to the spirits and to the father she had lost. At first, Ethan didn't grasp the meaning of these rituals, but he stood silently beside her, his deep eyes thoughtful and respectful. His world was one of orders and logic, survival carved out by strength and stubborn will, not by faith or tradition. Yet as he watched Sarah's delicate ceremonies, rooted in heritage, pain, and unyielding courage, something within him began to soften, easing the scars of battles past. He started teaching their children valuable lessons, how to stack kindling just so, how to read the wind before sparking a flame, how to stand behind him or Sarah if any stranger drew near. Their eldest daughter, with her sleek black hair and vigilant stance, watched him closely at first, then took up his teachings to guide the younger girls. Determined to stand strong in protection of her family, 7 days slipped quietly by, slow but brimming with meaning. Then came the engines, low mechanical rumbles cutting through the crisp winter air, foreign and alarming. Ranger's ears shot erect. Ethan paused his repair of a loose shutter, his muscles coiling ready. A sleek black truck rolled into their yard, snow spraying wide as it came to a halt. Behind it was the county sheriff's vehicle. The whole scene felt off, unnervingly pristine, too polished for the rough, isolated road leading to his remote ranch. The black truck's door swung open, and Towan stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face once perhaps handsome, but now hardened by bitterness. His dark hair was loosely tied back, though rebellious strands fell over a forehead, etched by years of hardship and fury. A stubbled jaw angled, tight eyes, sharp and mistrustful, scanning the yard with an entitled coldness that sent a spike through Ethan's chest. Following behind came Sheriff Cole Maddox, a weather-beaten man in his late 50s, stocky with graying hair thinning at the sides. His uniform hung a bit tight on his sturdy frame, but he carried the quiet, steady authority of someone accustomed to harsh winters and fractured lives. Towan's lips curled into a mocking smirk the moment he caught sight of Sarah behind the window. "Well," he called out, voice dripping with scorn. His uniform sat just a bit tight on his frame, yet he moved with the calm, unwavering authority of a man hardened by countless winter crises and relentless domestic calls. The corner of Tin's mouth curled into a smirk the moment he caught sight of Sarah through the glass. "Well," he shouted loud and teasing, "look at this, my wife pretending to be safe with some soldier boy." Sarah stepped out slowly, clutching the baby tight against her chest. Her daughters huddled behind her like scared little birds. The bruises on her wrists, dark green shadows fading slowly, still showed faintly. Ethan moved silently, positioning himself between her and Tawan without a word. Ranger stood firm by Ethan's side, fur bristling slightly, yet his stance was steady, awaiting the signal. Twin sneered, "Thought you could run from me, thought you could steal my kids." His voice carried fury, but beneath it was something colder, an unmistakable claim of ownership. Sheriff Maddox raised his hand. "Let's keep it civil, folks." He stepped closer to the cabin, taking in the scene. Ethan standing solid, Sarah trembling but determined. The kids retreating silently, Ranger alert and ready. Maddox's gaze softened as it landed on the youngest girl clutching her mother's leg. Inside, Maddox asked careful questions, not loud nor invasive, but deliberate, and the room itself spoke for Sarah long before she answered. The way the kids flinched at Talon's voice, the bruises on Sarah's arms, the flicker of fear on her daughter's faces when the idea of returning was mentioned. When Sarah finally detailed her escape, her voice quiet, steady, without drama, Maddox listened in silence, his weathered face tightening as he recognized the story one too often seen by men who have faced this too many times. Maddox looked at Taiwan. "I'm opening a file for domestic abuse," he declared. "You'll be in town court first thing tomorrow." Tin's nostrils flared. "You can't keep my family away from me. They aren't safe with you," Maddox replied flatly. Ethan felt tension ease from his shoulders, not triumph, but the relief of finally having someone else see the pain Sarah had long carried. Tawan shot Ethan a fierce glance. "This isn't over." He jabbed his finger at the children. "You're all coming home with me tomorrow." "No," Sarah said softly. "We're not." The sheriff escorted Tawan outside. The man climbed into his truck, slamming the door with such force the sound echoed into the barren hills. Snow kicked up beneath the tires as he tore away, leaving behind only exhaust fumes and bitter threats. Maddox lingered for a moment. "I'll do everything I can," he assured Sarah gently. "You and those kids deserve better." Then he tipped his hat, climbed into his car, and drove off the property. Silence settled over the ranch, heavy, yet no longer hopeless. Ethan met Sarah's gaze. They said nothing, but a quiet understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that the world had finally seen the part of her story she'd been too scared to tell aloud. Ranger nudged Ethan's leg, sensing the slow release of tension. Tomorrow would bring a different Storm Papers testimonies, and decisions that could alter the course of their lives forever. But for now, standing in the stillness of the yard, Sarah and her children stayed exactly where they needed, beneath a roof that promised shelter from the cold, beside a man who vowed never to let them face danger alone again. The Carbon County Town Hall was a simple brick building, its white trim peeling from winter's chill. Inside the courtroom, the air was tinged with the scent of pine polish and aged paper, a quiet reminder of countless stories told before. A scent lingered clinging to the benches and wooden railings like a haunting memory. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting a soft, pale gold across the room. At the front stood Sarah, tall, composed, though the tension gripping her shoulders was unmistakable. Her long black hair was braided flawlessly down her back, and the coppery glow of her skin seemed to shimmer in the gentle light. She wore a plain, dark dress lent by a neighbor Maddox had reached out to, a gesture the sheriff said was fitting for the courtroom. In her eyes rested a blend of sorrow and fierce courage, as if she had long learned to navigate storms before she ever had to run from one. Ethan sat a few rows behind her, steady and unyielding in his presence. His broad shoulders, square jaw, and calm demeanor brought a quiet weight to the room. Clad in a clean flannel shirt and worn jeans, his military posture betrayed the nerves he masked behind a stoic expression. At his feet lay Ranger, alert and watchful, his sable coat gleaming in the sun's splinters. Though dogs weren't technically allowed inside, Maddox had whispered to the bailiff, "He's part of the story," and no one challenged that. Judge Helen Rohr presided over the hearing, a woman in her early 60s, her silver hair twisted into a bun and sharp blue eyes missing nothing. Lines of kindness and understanding etched her face, balanced by the iron authority forged through decades serving miners, ranchers, and families trapped under cold winter's shadow. Her voice carried warmth and undeniable command. When Sarah spoke, the room hushed to a breathless silence. She recounted the early years of her marriage, how Talon had once been gentle, how hopes for a son had soured into bitterness, how alcohol seeped into the cracks of his disappointments until anger shaped the language of their home. She spoke of bruises blooming across her arms, and the fear settling like ice in her daughter's eyes with every slammed door. Her voice never wavered. It held the strength of a woman who had endured far too much to break. Now she told of the blizzard night, how she held her baby tight, gathered her daughters, and stepped into a storm that threatened death, because staying behind promised a slower kind of dying. Judge Rohr listened with deep focus, her expression softening as each word landed. Sheriff Maddox stepped forward next, standing solid in his worn brown jacket. His rugged face carried the same determination he'd shown through countless crises across the county. He testified to what he'd witnessed at Ethan's ranch, the children flinching at their father's presence, Sarah's lingering bruises the protective barrier they formed behind Ethan, and the calm, ordered safety the former SEAL had built in mere days. Maddox's tone was even, but the anger flickering in his eyes spoke of a man rarely given to fury while in uniform. Twin sat across the room, arms crossed tightly over broad shoulders. His long black hair was haphazardly tied back, eyes rimmed red, either from last night's drinking or a morning steeped in simmering rage. His jaw clenched hard as Sarah spoke. He rolled his eyes during Maddox's statements. He sneered when Ethan's name came up, but he could not erase the heavy truth filling the air. After a tense, lingering silence, Judge Rohr proclaimed her verdict. The courtroom held its breath as her voice rang through the chamber. The marriage was officially ended. Full custody was awarded to the mother. An immediate protective order was put in place. Mr. Tawin, you are barred from coming within 300 yards of Miss Wayaka and her children. Sarah closed her eyes, not in victory, but in a profound relief that seemed to empty her lungs entirely. Tan sprang to his feet, fury flashing across his face, but before he could speak, two deputies moved forward to restrain him. Judge Rohr's gavel fell once firm, final and resolute. When the courtroom silenced, Ethan guided Sarah and her daughters outside, matching her slow pace, as if not wanting to break the fragile magic of the moment. Ranger nestled his head against the eldest girl's leg, quietly offering his unwavering comfort. For the first time in years, Sarah inhaled air that tasted like freedom itself. The ranch welcomed them back softly, wrapped in quiet snow and the crackling of burning timber. Work began almost immediately, not out of obligation, but because fresh starts demand motion. Ethan crafted a new room onto the cabin, his powerful arms lifting beams with confident skill. He fixed the sagging roof, replaced worn-out boards, and strengthened the fence bordering their land. Every hammer strike seemed to chip away at the weight of his guilt. Meanwhile, Sarah cared for the earth with tender resolve. She sowed wildflower seeds by the front porch, blue flax and prairie coneflowers, declaring that this land deserved bursts of color after a long, harsh winter. She pieced together quilts from fabric scraps, softly humming lullabies that warmed even the chilliest dawns. Kneeling in the soil alongside her daughters, she taught them to gently cradle young roots in the earth with loving care. Laughter spilled across the yard like warm sunlight. The children chased Ranger near the woodpile, helped Ethan carry nails, and gathered stones to outline the new flower beds. The cabin no longer felt like just a stopover. It felt like a true home, with roots planted deeper than the frost. One evening, beneath a sky burning orange beyond the hills, Sarah stepped onto the porch, watching Ethan secure the last plank on the new room. He straightened, wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and met her gaze. Between them passed an unspoken understanding, a quiet gratitude, a fragile hope. Two broken lives were being carefully pieced back together, bit by bit, day after day. And for the first time since the storm, the future felt more like promise than peril. Spring crept into Montana softly, like a shy visitor painting the plains with gentle strokes of green. Patches of snow clung to shaded hollows, but the air carried a kindness that made even the wind sound less like a warning and more like an invitation. On one such morning, Ethan loaded blankets into the truck, along with a few gifts wrapped in plain brown paper, and enough food for the long journey ahead. Ranger leapt into the back seat, tail wagging in eager anticipation. Sarah stood on the porch, draped in a flowing blue dress that brought out the deep copper tones of her skin. Her hair, black and gleaming, was braided with a single white bead her mother had given her long ago. The children gathered close, each wearing small necklaces made from smooth, polished stones. Their eyes sparkled with a mixture of nerves and excitement. They had never ventured far from home before, yet today they would return to a place that once felt dangerous. Yet now this doorway marked the beginning of their shared destiny. The winding road through the reservation meandered past rolling hills and towering pine trees. The landscape grew intimately familiar to Sarah in ways both tender and aching. When they arrived at the heart of the community, a circle of humble homes encircled a grand communal lodge, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. On the steps stood her mother, Marianne Wiaka, a woman in her late 50s with streaks of silver woven into her tight braids, high cheekbones, and eyes that held the weight of ancient sorrow and unyielding strength. Her build was solid, and though grief had traced delicate lines around her mouth, her stance emanated a quiet resilience born of surviving more hardship than most knew. When Sarah ran into her arms, Marianne embraced her daughter with a mix of relief and sorrow. She gently cradled the children's faces, whispering their Lakota names, blessing each with a tender kiss upon the forehead. Then she turned her gaze to Ethan. He respectfully removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice deeper and tinged with humble reverence. Marianne studied him closely, her gaze sharp enough to uncover any man's hidden truths. She noted the tension along his jaw, the weight of exhaustion clouding his calm eyes, and the silent discipline etched in his posture. A soldier, she realized immediately, a man bearing burdens heavier than he let anyone perceive. Without a word, she nodded, signaling for him to follow her inside the lodge. The room exuded warmth and sacredness. Woven blankets draped the walls, while soft drumming played faintly from a distant speaker, mingling with the subtle scent of sage in the air. They settled facing one another. Sarah remained close, clutching the baby gently in her lap. Ethan placed his hands on his knees, bracing himself to finally reveal the secret he had carried for 15 long years. He started with the winter storm, the icy road, the moment the truck slipped toward the ravine. He spoke of the Lakota man who emerged from the white blur, like a guardian sent from the spirit world, the hands that wrapped him in a blanket, and the desperate effort to pull him free. His voice faltered when recounting the moment the earth gave way beneath the man's feet. A heavy silence settled when he finished. Marianne closed her eyes, a solitary tear tracing down her cheek. But no anger stirred, only the long-awaited release of sorrow she had kept locked away for so long. She pressed a hand against her heart. "He returned to the earth protecting another life," she whispered. "That is the passing of a true warrior." He would not want blame to linger where gratitude belongs. Ethan bowed his head, relief washing over him, bittersweet and profound. Nothing could rewrite the past, but forgiveness, freely given, loosened a heavy knot that had strangled his chest for years. Marianne reached out, touching his arm with quiet compassion. "Tell me what your heart intends for my daughter," she said. Ethan met her steady gaze. To stand beside her, he vowed to give those children a sanctuary, to ensure no one among them ever faces another winter alone. She nodded once, a single gesture that said everything. That night, the communal lodge filled with soft murmurs of greeting and the gentle rustle of ceremonial robes. The atmosphere pulsed with warmth, not from fire, but from souls gathered in hope and love. Sarah stood near the front, her shawl embroidered with a fresh lightning bolt pattern, a symbol of new beginnings, not endings. Ethan stepped forward, holding a small silver ring in his hand. He etched a slender lightning streak across the surface, a silent tribute to the blanket and the man who had saved his life. His hands trembled gently, not from fear, but from deep respect. He gazed at Sarah, the woman who had braved storms beyond his wildest imagination, and said, "If you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my days ensuring you and the children never face another storm alone." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Tears shimmered in her eyes. She gave a soft nod, Marianne and a few elders stepped forward carrying a star quilt, an expansive radiant blanket stitched in rich blues greens and fiery sunset reds. They wrapped it gently around Ethan and Sarah's shoulders, uniting them beneath its shared embrace. It stood for protection, unity, and the joining of two journeys. A circle formed family neighbors, elders, and children linked hand in hand. A gentle ancient chant rose, blessing their union with timeless grace. Ranger trotted playfully around the circle, a small cloth tied to his collar, drawing soft laughter as he became the ceremony's loyal four-legged witness. The marriage was simple, heartfelt, deeply rooted in both ancient tradition and the promise of tomorrow. It belonged not only to the past they were mending, but to the future they were now forging. When they returned to the ranch days later, the land felt somehow more alive. Melting snow revealed patches of stubborn green grass. The children ran freely across the yard, their joy like sweet music. Ethan stood beside Sarah on the porch as the sun sank low over Montana's sprawling plains. Her hand found his. Her head leaned gently on his shoulder. "This land used to feel empty," he breathed softly. "Like my life was just cold and silence." Sarah watched the children playing, their laughter echoing through the open air. Ranger barked once, sprinting after them. "And now," she whispered. Ethan squeezed her hand tighter. "Now the winters don't bite so harshly. Not with you here beside me." She smiled, nestling closer, and together they watched their family, new, imperfect, miraculous, take root in a place once shadowed only by loss. As twilight faded, the ranch exhaled its old sorrows, and for the first time in many years, so did they. Some say miracles come with thunder angels, or signs written in the sky. But sometimes a miracle looks like a weary soldier halting on a frozen highway. Sometimes it's a mother who refuses to surrender when the world insists she should. And sometimes it's two broken souls finding each other precisely when God decides they've borne enough hurt. Maybe that's the true lesson here. We don't always grasp why storms descend. We don't always understand why we lose those we cherish, or why the path becomes so brutal that we fall to our knees. But God places people in our lives at the perfect hour, in the perfect season, to remind us that no winter lingers forever. If you're watching this tonight feeling like the cold has lasted too long, hold on. Redemption doesn't always burst in loudly. Sometimes it comes slowly, softly, like a hand reaching out through the snow. And if this story touched your soul, please share it so someone else might feel a little less alone. Leave a comment. Tell us which part moved you the most. And if you want more stories of hope, healing, and second chances, subscribe and become part of our family here. May God bless you and keep you warm through every storm. And with flawless timing, gently reminds us that none of us are destined to journey through life on our own. Amen.